Let me tell you about an organization that needs your help year-round. Jeremiah Program is breaking the cycle of poverty 2 generations at a time by empowering single moms to pursue college degrees while their children receive high-quality early education. And your gift provides critical support that makes success possible. So go on over to jeremiahprogram.org/Austin to give today and learn how you can be part of the movement to disrupt generational poverty. Again, that's jeremiahprogram.org/Austin. APD is walking a fine line when it comes to interacting with ICE. They have to comply with state law, but they also want to protect Austin's immigrants and keep their trust. They really have been stuck between a rock and a hard place. And to make things worse, they handed a Honduran woman and her 5-year-old daughter over to ICE. And so now they're talking about changing policy. But is it enough? Today on CityCast Austin, my guest is going to break it all down. It's Tuesday, January 20th. I'm Nikki Devon, and this is what Austin's talking about. Hello, I am here today with Emiliano Gomez, a Latino communities reporter at the Austin American-Statesman. What's up, Emiliano?
It's good to be here, Nikki. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here. So today, Hands Off Central Texas is calling for people to walk out and rally at Austin City Hall to call on City Council and the Austin Police Department to stop working so closely with ICE. APD is in the middle of changing their policy to clarify the relationship between them and ICE. Do you think that this change will calm people down? Like this promise to clarify their relationship is going to calm people down?
You know, I think where we are right now, I think shows the difficulty of it all. I think to answer your question, I think it will be very hard to calm people down, and I don't think this will do it. But that being said, I think it's very important to kind of make sense of where at least the Austin Police Department and the city think they stand, right? Or at least what they think they can do is probably the more exact phrase there. And so if we kind of should we take a step back, Nikki, and kind of try to make sense as to why we are where we are, at least here locally in Austin?
Yes.
Just I think maybe that will help me kind of explain how we've made sense of it here at the Statesman.
Yeah.
On Monday, January 5th, Austin police responded to a 911 call at about 4:30. So before the sun is even out, right? At least this is the information we've gotten from Austin police. And they responded to a 911 call made by a woman, a Honduran national living in Southwest Austin. There is a dispute, right, between this woman and another man, a man she claims she has a restraining order against, right? And then so Austin police ends up beginning to do this investigation, and they run her information through a system, right, this federal database. And when they run her through this federal database, which is a very normal thing that police could do, right? If they're trying to make sense of who are these individuals they're interacting with, they'll run individuals through what is called the National Crime Information Center, and that's the NCIC. And so they run people through this database, and it comes up that she has a warrant, right? And one thing that's very interesting to understand is that these immigration warrants are popping up to police in a database that's meant for criminal warrants. And so police see this, they see a tag that ICE has put on there saying, call ICE. And so police officers left that decision of what they have to do. And so they do call ICE on this woman because this is still what we've been trying to kind of make out here, but it is because Austin police say that they weren't able to tell if the woman was they did not believe that she might be being honest. They wanted to run her information, and this pops up, and then the officer there made the decision to call ICE, right? And ICE comes, they pick her up, and because this woman had a 5-year-old daughter, who though was a U.S. citizen, she didn't want to leave, she takes the U.S. citizen daughter with her, and then now they are in Honduras, right? And so that quick chain of events, right? And I think we at the Statesman trying to make sense of that, because the initial police information that they were giving was very confusing and did not make sense and was actually incorrect. And we can get into the technicalities of why it was incorrect in a second, but it was incorrect, really brought us and other outlets to report about this, right? So what is happening here, and why did Austin police call ICE? And then in the aftermath of that, I think Austin police felt that they had to very much cement a policy, right? Because they were getting a lot of popular attention on this matter. And that's how we end up being where we are today.
So for people listening, I just want to clarify. Mm-hmm. This woman call the police because she was in fear for her safety, because she has a restraining order on someone that evidently was close enough proximity to her to where she felt like she had to call the cops. They ran her through the NCIC, and now the information that I have here says that there's two different things. There's a detainer warrant and there's an administrative warrant. And evidently, Texas law says if it's a detainer warrant, then yes, APD has to call ICE. But if it's an administrative warrant, evidently they do not have to call ICE. And apparently this woman had an administrative warrant, so they did not have to call ICE. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you're right. This is a technicality, but I think it's really interesting and important to understand. And that is, you're right. So there is something called the detainer, which is not a warrant, but it is a request ICE will make to a jail, right? So once a law enforcement agency has somebody in custody and they've booked them, ICE can go through the information that a jail has and say, look, this individual, we see them, we think they line up with who we want because of a immigration violation, hold them for us when you were going to release them, whether that be after they've served their term, or if you were just going to release them on bail, hold them for us, do not release them on bail. We're going to come pick them up, right? And Texas law requires jails, right? They, as of 2018, the court rulings ended, jails tend to be run by counties, right? But jails to hold people. And that's a detainer, right? The confusion, but you are right. Administrative warrants are not given by judges, like warrants that we often think about. Administrative warrants are made by ICE themselves. So ICE will say, we are giving our officers the power to arrest this person because of an immigration violation. That is an ICE administrative warrant, right? And that's what this woman had here. We're not exactly sure the circumstances, but at some point, ICE decided that that this woman had broken immigration law, and that if she were to be found, they wanted their agents to take her into custody, right?
Right.
And so she had that, and that pops because of a move by the Trump administration. Early last year, they uploaded nationwide over 700,000 of these immigration administrative warrants to the federal criminal database, right? And so a police officer can run somebody up, and these warrants will pop up just alongside a warrant by another law enforcement agency saying this person has committed a crime, please hold them for us, right? And that I think is the potential space for confusion or action, right? So it could be that a police officer is confused and decides to do it because they're confused, or it could be that a police officer out of their discretion decides, you know what, I want this person taken up. And that's really the position that the federal government has put local law enforcement in, the idea of, if you want to help us, please help us. And with all the pressure that we see here in Texas because of a state legislature that wants everybody to collaborate with the federal government on this immigration crackdown, you see this pressure on local law enforcement, and they have to make that decision. And that is I think, the nut of what we're seeing here.
But at the core, technically, they did not have to call ICE.
They did not. That is true. You're right. The laws that require them to comply with detainers do not require them to comply with these ICE warrants at all. You are very correct.
And now here we are, and we've had this situation where this woman has been taken away, and now they're like, okay. Now we're gonna clarify things. Now we're gonna figure this out. It feels a little like day late and a dollar short, if that's the right term to use in this situation.
Yeah, I think that is one of the things, right? Is making sense of how Austin police had trained their officers and how they will be training them in the future. Because I think, kind of back to your first question, in terms of like, will you be able to satisfy people with this policy? I think the policy itself is discretion. And the thing is that policy is not changing anything, right? So to this point, an Austin police officer had theoretically the discretion whether to call ICE, right? They could decide, you know what, I want to call ICE on this person, or I don't, because you're right, they did not legally have to. Whether or not they were confused, we don't know, or whether, they would have done it out of, a sense that they wanted to do that. We do not know for every individual case when this happened. And what city reports show is that this happened 33 times through the first 9 months of last year. So we're still going to try to make sense of how many times it happened in the whole year, but that's what we know as of now. But so to your point, the policy is discretion. And Chief Davis told us when she spoke to us, she wants her officers to use what she said was reasonableness. That was the word she used. And so that is the idea of like, will an officer decide if this person has they see either a criminal record on this person that they decide that this is somebody they do want to turn over to ICE, or another word she used was compassion, right? Or will an officer decide to use compassion? We're leaving it up to the hands of law enforcement. And there are some legal technicalities, I think, as to why Austin Police believes they have to do that. But I think that's what you're seeing people make sense of, that this is really not changing too much, and also people being frustrated about.
Yeah, I think that it's a mistake to trust that every single officer is going to have compassion, and every single officer is not going to have personal prejudice, and every single officer is going to, you know what I mean? Like, we'd like to think that every APD officer would handle things like this with discretion and compassion and, use their, best judgment. But I don't know about that.
I think one thing to if you want to fully try to understand the city's perspective, it is as follows. It is the 2017 law, right, that requires them to comply with detainers also says that local governments cannot prohibit their law enforcement from aiding ICE, right? So, they can create a policy, but they cannot prohibit it. And I think the city is nervous about the state government coming back at them and either suing them or maybe next legislative cycle around just removing this discretion they have in the first place, right? And again, I don't know where any of that would stand in the courts, but I think that is the city's kind of concern. And I mean, to be frank though, yes, I mean, what you are saying is very, I think, much the concern of many people. I mean, we can look at Houston and see that Houston is doing this
right,
very much as well. And we have seen a lot of controversy in Houston about this. We have seen individuals who call because their parents or their family members who are in a mental health crisis end up getting picked up by ICE. We have seen individuals in traffic stops getting picked up by ICE. And that is happening here in Austin too. Austin is a smaller city, so we have some less cases of that, but it's very much happening in both. And so you're right, we are leaving a lot up to the hands of local law enforcement. And it's kind of be up to, I think, either council to see if they think there's actually anything else they can do. It's going to be up to people, I think, putting pressure if they want kind of more clear, they want to see if there is a stricter policy that can be done. And then we're going to have to see how things shake out. Because you're right now, this is, first, at least here in Austin, we're getting a lot of attention to this. And so it's kind of the first time that we're starting to see what policies might come around this.
This feels like a departure from what Austin Police Chief Lisa Davis originally said. Originally, it seemed as if she took a much more stern stance, like about how she was staying out of it. APD was staying out of it. Am I remembering that correctly? Isn't that how she was initially in the past?
You are very correct that back in let's say January, February of last year, right? Trump comes into office and APD gives interviews with us and with other news outlets. And they really try to hold that stance of, ICE is coming in, doing their arrest, but that's not our business. We don't enforce immigration law. We have no plans to enforce immigration law. But you're right. I mean, it is a departure in that. And I think it shows just how many ways the federal government is trying to bring everybody into this, right?
Yeah.
And then agencies like APD are going to have to make decisions as to how they operate. And I guess the decisions they make will decide how successful it is. Because I really do think, there is a lot of potential here for the state government or for other agencies to come in and really pressure the city even more. And I think, liberal cities in Texas have always done this. So it's like they can do what they want, but they always run the risk of attracting the attention of the state government, which will then, the state legislature, I should say, which will then come in and say, you know what, we've decided that our form of politics is telling you to do it our way. And our way is going to be what, goes against what you guys believe. And so that is, I think, really this line that we're seeing everything play down.
We mentioned this at the beginning, that Police Chief Lisa Davis, that she's proposing a policy change. Do we know or have any idea what that policy change is going to look like?
Yeah. So yes, the policy that is in the memorandum that the legal department gave to City Hall, that APD has been discussing with us, with others, is discretion. And you're right, that is why it's such a gray area. And right, is because the only I think departure from that officer discretion that we're going to see is that Chief Davis says she will instruct her officers that if they decide they want to call ICE, it will be the decision of higher ups of whether or not that officer should stay at the site and wait for ICE to come, right? In the sense that Chief Davis says, her policy is that we want to prioritize other things, and that therefore we won't let people wait around with these people in many cases because we have more important things to do. But really, there's not much new that's being drawn out because, like we said, discretion has been the policy, discretion will be the policy.
So the policy is that the APD officer uses their discretion. And if they decide that they're going to call ICE, the thing that police chief is trying to decide is, should they then just bounce out? Like, we called ICE. All right, we're out. We're not, this is, and wash their hands. Like, may the odds ever be in your favor. We did what we're supposed to do. We called ICE. We snitched. Now we're burning off. And hopefully ICE gets here in time to pick the people. Is this what I'm hearing? Am I oversimplifying it?
I think, right. There are two very much parts of this policy, right? Like we said, yes, the first part is the kind of codification of this sort of discretion. So we don't know in what percentage of cases APD will be content-based. And the difficult thing, I think, from the journalist perspective will be trying to make sense of that, because I don't know if that will show up in the record. As like, if they do call ICE, that will show up in the record and we'll be able to see, like, we saw 33 times in the first 9 months of last year. When they made those decisions not to, if that's a majority of cases, if that's a minority of cases, we don't know. And that is something we're still trying to make sense of. But yes, to the second part of the policy, which is that she wants a sort of top to bottom chain of commands on whether or not they're going to wait around on an individual if ICE does decide they want to come pick it up. Because I should clarify, every time they contact ICE doesn't mean ICE will come. Many contacts they call that if you look at the 33 times they called ICE last year, there were times they called ICE that ICE decided not to come. And then there were times that ICE did come. And so the question in those specific cases that ICE says, yes, we do want to come, it will then be in the higher up chains of commands of whether or not APD waits around to leave that person to ICE or whether they don't.
Do we know if they're saying the chain of command for each individual example? So is it going to be one of those things like each time they're calling ICE, they have to get a chain of command, or are they talking about a blanket policy to be decided now in the chain of command whether or not people will hold on to people and wait for ICE? Do we know?
Yes. So they won't have to go up the chain of commands on whether to call, but they will have to go up to the chain of commands whether to wait.
Each time?
Each time that they do call ICE and ICE does tell them to wait, they would have to call up the chain of command and say, should we wait?
Oh, shit.
But again, we don't know in what percentage of context they are going to call ICE.
Yeah.
And that is something I think we want to continue to press, the police department to make better sense of. But who knows if we will get answers on that? Because again, if the policy is discretion, who knows how much information on discretion will end up being held in the record.
That seems really convoluted and confusing to me.
I think those of us who aren't in the police world, I think that is. I do think really the main part of this guidance, which we expect to become policy, right? The main part of this guidance, I think that people should understand is the discretion part, right? Is that APD has decided that they cannot do anything but leave it up to discretion and then train their officers on when to use that discretion. That is the main part of the policy. But you're right. To that second part of the policy, it could become convoluted, or at least it could appear that way to us.
Crazy. How do you think this will affect APD's relationship with ICE? How do you, because again, like from an outsider standpoint, it just feels like it's going to complicate things and confuse things even more.
Yeah, I mean, this is, very much the concern that several activists have shared with the Statesman and that we've written about. To varying extents, activists will argue that local law enforcement should stay so away from this, and not only should stay so far away from immigration enforcement, but should really have that policy of communicating to the public that we are not going to talk to ICE in any way. And the way that argument goes is that if you're able to, to actually execute that, then you will have a much stronger relationship with the community you are trying to keep safe, right? Which is the job of law enforcement. And because obviously the question here that I think we see is, will immigrant communities or immigrant communities where large amounts of people or where anybody doesn't have full status, will they be less likely to call for help? And will they be less likely to assist law enforcement with their job? And I mean, maybe this is somewhat of an aside, but I mean, last year we reported about at least one case where DPS asked an immigrant without status, right, to help. And then they just, after the immigrant has given their testimony, sweep them up and arrest them, right? I know DPS, state troopers, are not ICE, but I am saying, people, there are examples of when that has happened. And so this is why this is very much a concern of activists and even of some law professors that I've spoken to.
Yeah. That's exactly the point. Mm-hmm. That's totally on point. It calls into question the safety of our immigrant community because just as a Black person, I will not lie to you. am way less likely to call the cops for anything, to be quite honest. If I can avoid calling the cops, I will avoid calling the cops at all costs, just because personally, I have a low level distrust of cops, right? And I am not an immigrant. I'm not, you know what I mean? Like, so there's already, I think, with a lot of brown people in general, regardless of your status, this kind of, I'm not going to speak for everybody, but I will say that, like, most of the brown people I know, they're like, yeah, okay, they tread lightly with cops in general. But if you're showing them that if you call for help, you risk losing everything and being swept off and taken somewhere that you don't know, then it sends the message that APD is not safe. You're not safe. That means you're not safe for the immigrant community at all. That means you cannot be trusted, in my opinion. It means you cannot be trusted to keep our immigrant community safe, because you're going to fucking haul them off to, you know what I mean? It's like, so you're putting people in danger, and you're also putting a target on them. And so I think that's my biggest fear, is like this target that this is inadvertently putting on immigrant communities in our city,
I think we'll have to see, in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term, what will that relationship change to look like? I mean, if it's, will it continue, or will it deteriorate? And to what extent? I think you're right. I think that's something that very much we're interested in to make sense of. Yeah.
So what do you think this means for immigrant families in Austin going forward? Like, have you been having any conversations with families? What do you think this means for them?
And in all the conversations I've had with these families for different stories, I think, or something that was already very clear to us because of how it comes up time and time again, is that non-federal agents have already very much been part of the immigration crackdown here in Texas, and specifically in Austin. And we really have seen that through the state troopers, through DPS, right? DPS has, its headquarters and has a lot of officers based out of, just north of downtown, right? Which is on the way to Austin's most immigrant-heavy corridor, which is the Rumberg-Lamar area. And when you speak to individuals who've had family members detained or deported, when you speak to individuals who've had interactions with ICE, here in Austin, it has almost always been state troopers came, they stopped me, and then they decided they stopped somebody I knew, and then they decided whether to call ICE, right? So we've seen little these other agencies that are not ICE, that are not federal immigration agents, become involved with immigration enforcement. And so I think the concern, the fear, the fright, it was already very much out there. And I think one way you really see that is if you look at kind of what social media posts, right, reels, what videos go viral. I mean, you will see large groups of law enforcement show up all over the Austin Hispanic communities. Those sorts of videos attract attention. And it's not always ICE and it's not always DPS, right? In the past, it has previously been, videos of a lot of APD officers together. And you already see this video being like, everybody watch out about this corridor. And so this idea that, that fear, that concern has already been there. APD has already been fighting this, and that sort of, for all of us, right? It's hard to make sense of what agency does what when you're not paying attention to the technicalities of law enforcement day in, day out for any sort of American, right? Or anybody living in this country. And so I think that fear, that distrust has already been there. I think to your point, if people were previously making that distinction between I can call Austin police, but I don't want to call, I'm hoping other law enforcement agencies do not get involved with this. You're right. I mean, maybe now they will also have distrust with Austin police. That is very, very possible.
Yeah.
I see that, yes, very much as a strong possibility.
So I'm curious. I personally am feeling like online, there seems to be more and more and more ICE activity in Central Texas and Austin. I see stuff online that's like, okay, they're ICE agents. Literally, I saw something yesterday where there was ICE agents, they're here at this place. They're at Kyle. They're at Mueller. So I'm seeing more and more of this stuff online. And so I was wondering if you have any information on whether or not ICE activity is ramping up. Is it really ramping up, or does it just feel like it is because everything is so heightened right now?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I will say, I mean, there is currently, I think, a policy from the federal government and from ICE very specifically of not communicating with the press, right? Especially not in any way in a very comprehensive or helpful manner. And so, this isn't, information we can necessarily track very well through ICE. But I will say, I mean, Austin, for example, has not had a huge raid by ICE, as you might have seen in other cities where they've like very publicly gone to a job site or whatnot and stop people. But we have seen ICE agents very much doing that because, again, state troopers would have been stopping large trucks carrying, for example, Latin American immigrant laborers, right? And then saying, hey, we're going to hold you here and we're going to call ICE. And then so we have been seeing that, all throughout last year. So when we do see ICE agents seemingly away from state troopers, that does, I think, pique our interest. And you're right, we did see some of that in Kyle, and that kind of came alongside the fact that ICE had asked Buda City Hall if they could park a big vehicle, seemingly a transportation vehicle outside of City Hall, right? So in that sense, they have become more public, but I think they very much have been operating in an extensive manner, and they have been because here in Austin and here in Texas, it really has been the state troopers that have allowed them to kind of operate and to kind of work in a more, for them, efficient manner because they have a law enforcement agency that is calling them once people are already ready to be picked up. And so I think it's hard to tell to some extent, but I wanted to say they very much have been here and they very much have been operating, right?
Yeah.
Whether they're going to be operating more independently now, I think that's yet to be seen, right? Maybe in the next few months we will see that.
Okay. Yeah. It feels like this seemingly was, now we know it's not out of nowhere, but what it feels like this seemingly out of nowhere, capitulation to ICE. It feels like it's because APD maybe doesn't want to attract too much federal attention. It kind of feels like they're like, okay, if we seem like we're playing along and we play along, maybe it'll keep us under the radar from too much federal attention. Are you getting any of that feeling at all or information? You think that we're trying to stay under the radar and that's why we're playing ball maybe?
I think that's what you hear from a ton of city officials. I think the opposite argument that you hear community members or others make is, Austin tries to stay away from attention all the time from the state government on tons of things that it wants to do differently than the state government. And the state government, or the state legislature, again, sorry, is who I'm referring to here, figures it out and decides if they want to be petty or if they want to act in a politics that is very opposite of Austin's, that they will do so, right? And so the question becomes, if this time around, the sort of mentality among a lot of elected officials in what is a very dark blue city like Austin has been, let's not be as confrontational as the first time around. I think what we will be trying to make sense of these next 4 years, or these next 3 years, I should say, will be, did that end up being more successful than the upfront, right? That is really, because those are the two ideologies of how to show your opposition. And then so I think time tells which one ends up being more effective, right?
Wow. Yeah. And you actually bring up a really good question. Is Austin City Council unified on how they want Austin PD to interact with ICE? Or are we also seeing kind of dissension there? Because it also kind of feels like they're not on the same page.
We got to speak to some council members in the aftermath of, for example, the arrest of this Honduran woman. They seem to want the public aware of this. They did seem to want Austin police to have a policy on this. Some told me ideally we would have a policy where Austin police, didn't have to do this at all, right? But I think for them, it really has been, at least as I analyze it, is this time around, as you mentioned, that sort of mentality has been like, what can we do? And also in some way stay out of the spotlight of the federal government and of the state government. Again, is that possible? News still comes out. The federal government and the state government, if they want to pay attention, are still very much going to see what's happening and decide to act on what their politics are, which are to continue to move this heavy machinery that is the immigration arrests and deportations.
Okay, so my final question is, what should Austinites be paying attention to, or what should they know and be looking for as far as immigration news in town is concerned?
I think it will be a very interesting question of whether or not the enforcement in a more visible way steps up this year, right? In terms of how the federal government, as we see it, elevating tensions or deciding to continue to use the brute force it has in a city like Minneapolis, right? How that will change in different cities in the U.S. You're right. We're all trying to make sense of what that's going to look like this year. And like you mentioned, we don't know if maybe this year ICE will act in a more independent and more, again, they are very visible and they have been acting very much so in the Austin area, but even more so, I think it will be very interesting to see as we continue to receive reports from the city as to the extent to which APD ends up making these calls, right? Are they doing it only 2 to 3 times every quarter, which is when these reports come out? Are they doing it 20 times, 40 times each quarter? If all of a sudden the numbers jump up this year, that's going to be really interesting. And you're right, that is going to show that Austin police has decided that this is the way that they're going to act versus if the numbers stay really low, then you're going to realize, well, Austin police was trained to use discretion and they tried to use it as little as possible. And I think that sort of data will give us the sense as to whether we see an expansion there. And I think people really should, if this is something that they care about, they should be trying to make sense of.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Emiliano. This has been great. I've been itching to talk to somebody about this because I think it feels like I don't know. It's all I can think about. And so it's been really nice to talk to you about this. Thank you so much for coming on again. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me, Nikki. Thanks so much.
That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. You can find links to Emiliano's reporting in our show notes. If you enjoyed this show, you have to tell your friends, rate our show, spread the word, leave us a review, and of course, subscribe to our Hey Austin newsletter. And if you really love us and you're digging what we're doing and you're liking what we're putting out there, and this is helping you have conversations with your friends, become a neighbor today. Go to membership.citycast.fm and find out all the cool things that you get when you join our Neighbors program. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye, y'all.